Hello and welcome to the Beneverse Movie Channel, where today on the show we are talking about the filmography of Martin Scorsese. I believe this is his 16th title. We're in the year 1997 with the film Kundun. Joining me today, film critic. You can find him at drewmcweeny.com. Drew McWeeny is joining me. Honored to have you on the show.
Thank you. I am very pleased to be here. I am a huge fan of this movie and this filmmaker, so this should be a lot of fun, man.
You know, this was like the really lucky thing, right? When I reached out to you, I reached out to you by email. I was looking at the list of titles that I had, and I just was like, I don't know if it was something because, you know, I've been following you for a number of years now, and I just like maybe it was like a tweet at some point where you had tweeted something about it. But I'm just like, I'm going to ask Drew for Kundun. And I'm going to just see what happens. Like, I'm just going to like, if he's like, oh, I'm interested and it's a nut, but let's do another movie like sure. But I'm just like, let's just try with Kundun. And you were like instantly, I think within 5 minutes of the email, like I'm in, underrated gem. And yep. This was an exciting time for me as well, because like, you know, we've been talking for the past few weeks about this. This was my first experience watching Kundun. In fact, it was my first time like, hearing of this movie. Like this was just like, you know, I felt like pretty proud of the self that like, you know, I'm a film historian. I've done my homework. I was in college for history and specifically like film. Like I felt really confident in like, even if I hadn't seen every Scorsese film, I at least had a history or understanding of most of them. And this one was like, I'm like, what is this title in his filmography? And then I saw the cover and I'm like, oh, I do actually remember this in Blockbuster circa like 2002. This is a really interesting title. And Drew, before we actually jump into anything, like I said, I've been following your writing for years. I also know you as the Godfather from the Showdown for a few years there. Like I've known you from this space for a while. I've been a fan of you. What like I guess this is the question we all kind of ask each other. Like, what got you into film originally?
I think my lightning bolt moment was Star Wars in '77. I was 7, and my parents had seen it the night before. My birthday was the weekend it came out. It was May 26th, and so that weekend we were supposed to have a big party with all my friends. And my parents went and saw Star Wars on Friday night. My party was supposed to be on Saturday. And when I got up on Saturday, they were like, "You're not having your party today. We're just going to take all your friends and go do something." I was so mad. I was so upset. And they made us stand in line. We had to stand in line because this was, of course, the days of just you went and took your chances. We stood in line for 2 whole showings of the movie because the word had already gotten out. And the entire time I was miserable. I was so angry. And then they took us in the theater and my life changed. And I walked out the other side and I was like, who did that? My parents were like, what do you mean? I was like, who did it? Who made that happen? And they took me to a poster. They showed me on the poster, written and directed by George Lucas. And I was like, that's what I want to do. That right there. And it was that big a lightning bolt moment. And I still remember, not only do I remember that event, but I remember the rest of the posters in the lobby. I still remember the 2 posters on the other side of the Star Wars poster were the incredible melting man on one side and Sorcerer on the other side. And those posters are just burned into my brain. And it started me down this road where I needed to know everything about everything. And it became truly an obsession very quickly. And so by the time I finally got to Scorsese, which would have been 1980, I think is when because the year of 1980, I was very excited about movies. I was getting more and more into movies. And I was starting to pay attention to the Oscars. Yeah. And this thing, Raging Bull, kept popping up at the Oscars. And I kept seeing the images from Raging Bull. And I was like, I don't know what that is, but it looks so interesting. Like just the black and white and the photography of it and the intensity of how it looked. So that became, I was fascinated by that movie and needed to see that movie. That was my way into him. And I think I was 11 when I saw it, and it started me down this road of, I got to know who this guy is. I got to know what the fuck just happened to me in that movie theater. That was so insane as an experience and so different than anything else that I had encountered in film up to that point. He was really maybe my gateway into adult movies, into grown-up films, was the idea that here was this guy who was making these challenging things that everybody talked about, and they were completely off limits to me. which meant I had to know what they were and I had to see them.
Yeah, there's this like interesting relationship that I've had with Scorsese, especially as revisiting a lot of his films past a few months, but also just kind of remembering like when I first saw like Scorsese. And I've been racking my brain because I feel like my answer changes on like every episode. Like I think at one point I'm like, I think Departed was actually my first Scorsese film. And then I'm like, was it like my first exposure like a little earlier or like later? And then I'm like trying to rack it. So I'm at this point right now where if I'm correct, I think The Wolf of Wall Street is my first Martin Scorsese film. I'm like, I'm born in 1998. So Wolf of Wall Street comes out and I'm 14, 15 when that film comes out. It comes out end of 2013. And like I've talked about this experience and I've been a big film fan like kind of my whole life. Like my parents are from LA, specifically like my dad's best man used to be Brendan Fraser's stunt double in like The Mummy and all that. So like I've had a close relationship with film like since like I can remember, and specifically like the filmography of Brendan Fraser, because they were child friendly. Like he was doing George of the Jungle. Those were easy enough movies for my parents to show me and be like, oh, that's your Uncle Chris like swinging right there, like all of that. Like there was that. And then like with Scorsese specifically, like I don't remember when I first remember hearing the name Scorsese. I want to say it was probably around Wolf of Wall Street at the age of like 13, 14 is when I truly like get it. And I do know for a fact I like Wolf of Wall Street was the movie of his that I saw in the theaters for the first time. Like that was the first.
You said you were 13 or 14?
Let's see. I'm born 98. I must be at that point 14, about to turn 15. I think when Wolf of Wall Street.
God in heaven, that is the deep end of the pool, man. That movie is as R-rated as R-rated gets.
That's basically the thing, and like I've always tried to explain it because like it was such an exciting time for Wolf of Wall Street when I'm in like I think my freshman year of high school, and like that trailer was literally the talk of like everyone in high school. Because like it had Leonardo DiCaprio coming off The Great Gatsby, Django Unchained, all of that. Like there was a certain like just love of Leonardo DiCaprio at that time, especially because we were all freshmen, so we had all had to watch The Great Gatsby movie that he did instead of reading the book. And like so with that, like there was just an energy. Like the Black Skinhead by Kanye West is on the soundtrack for the trailer of that movie. Like there was so much to it. And then like getting into it, I really do think that was my first exposure to it. I remember sneaking in to Wolf of Wall Street. Like I do remember.
I bet.
Because that was like, my parents didn't really care what I watched. And so it wasn't like an issue with me watching Wolf of Wall Street. I just don't think they knew what Wolf of Wall Street was.
Yeah.
So when I'm like, oh, I'm going to go see with my friends Wolf of Wall Street. One, I doubt they realized it was an R-rated movie. Two, I doubt they realized what was in Wolf of Wall Street, which like, for me and my friends, that was like a changed experience, like going to see Wolf of Wall Street, sneaking in. I'm trying to think. I think we bought tickets to The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which also came out in 2013. And like, so we snuck in like, and like, we're clearly like 14. So I think some of the other like auditorium like members were like, I don't know if these kids should be there, but we like kept quiet. We were in like the third row, and I kind of just remember like having my mind blown by Wolf of Wall Street.
That's bet
like it was such an exciting movie. Like everything about that movie, from just the energy, Jonah Hill at that time, like Margot Robbie, like my first introduction to her, like just so much of it. But like it's then so interesting because then from that point on, like you go backwards, right? Like you kind of talked about 1980 Raging Bull, the Academy Awards. I was already a kid who was really into the Academy Awards. It was just so happened that between 2006 from The Departed to really, I guess Hugo was definitely in the conversation, was nominated for a lot of awards, but it didn't feel like he had really had his Oscar moment in my lifetime. Like there was nothing like where he was really front and center. The Artist was obviously the big film from 2011. So he wasn't a guy like I learned about from watching the Oscars ceremony. And that's like, so going backwards, like, like I then learned like, oh, Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, these movies that I've heard about, never watched, like, oh, that's this guy. And I guess that's kind of just a good place to start. So you watch Raging Bull, you kind of realize the specialness of it. How quickly from there did you just start seeking out everything? Like, when did he become the premier director for you?
Well, those were the early days of home video, and my parents were very early adopters. We had an uncle. I had an uncle who was married to my dad's sister and worked for the RCA plant in Memphis. So he got one of the very first commercial VCRs. It rolled off the assembly line. He called us. He was like, "I've got this thing. You're gonna see. It's the future." And the first time we went to his place and we saw a pre-recorded tape, a store-bought copy of Jailhouse Rock, and put it in and played it. And to me, that was a paradigm shift. Everything changed. The idea that you could have a movie at home, watch it when you wanted to, not randomly when it came on television, because I was already at that point mainlining anything that came on TV. I would get the TV guide at the beginning of the week. I would circle every movie based on that I wanted to see. And then I would get up in the middle of the night and go downstairs and at 2 a.m. watch the TV very low so that my parents didn't hear me. And I could just watch something in the middle of the night. And I would go, okay, now I can check that off the list. I finally saw that one. Okay, good. There we go. And that was how I saw movies for a while. So the idea of the VCR was mind-blowing to me, that I could suddenly control how I saw things, when I saw things, and go back and see things. And that was the big thing. So my dad invested in an early video store in Chattanooga, and we would get everything at the house to process, and we would process all the tapes and put the stickers on them and everything. And I would watch everything. My parents both worked, so they were out of the house. So I would come home from school and mainline 2 movies every day, anything. And I saw a lot of stuff that I didn't even know how to process yet because of the age I was. And I remember anything R-rated especially was on the radar. So like, I remember one afternoon I was like, oh, an unmarried woman, that sounds hot. It is not, just for future reference. And for an 11-year-old, baffling, utterly baffling as a movie. But there were, there were names that I started to look for: Altman, Scorsese, Coppola, names that I was starting to realize these guys are attached to these things that seem so special to me, that are so interesting to me. And very quickly, also reading, I realized there was a group of guys, the 70s guys, that were sort of my initiation into what filmmaking was. That all the new Hollywood guys, Friedman, Scorsese, Coppola, those were the guys that I really became obsessed with first and dug into first. And so I very quickly saw Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore and Taxi Driver and Mean Streets, and then started following his career as a as they were happening. So the first film that I was desperate to go see in a theater of his was King of Comedy.
Yeah. And one of my favorites.
Terrific movie. I just showed it to the boys for the first time last week, my 2 sons, and they've been waiting to see it for a while. We've been working through his filmography, and it was a big one. It landed really hard for them. They both are Jerry Lewis fans from when they were kids. So seeing Jerry Lewis as just this rage machine, fascinating. They had no idea that Jerry even had that in him. And I'm like, no, that's Jerry.
That's probably the closest to Jerry. Like that might be the most honest reveal of who Jerry's character is.
I'm like, no, guys, you've been watching the fake Jerry this whole time. That's Jerry. That's him right there. So, and it has been a real thrill over the course of his career to watch him. First of all, to see the period where he was basically considered out of the business. And, every now and then he'd bubble up and you go, hey, Color Money's awesome. And then nobody was talking about it. And these were little and After Hours, awesome. Nobody was talking about it. These were not movies that were breaking through. Color of Money felt like a little bit of a hit, a little bit.
Yeah, it had the cruise factor of it.
But it wasn't the hit that it would have been. I honestly, even 6 years later, if they'd made that exact same movie with those 2 people, I think it would have been a monster hit. But I think he was just at a point where he was kind of box office poison and nobody knew what to do with him. And so it was that era of his was fascinating. And he was kind of in the wilderness. It was like, he makes movies occasionally and he pops back up, but he's not centered in the industry the way he is now and the way he should be.
Yeah.
So watching his career go through the ebbs and flows, I think has been educational, because I would argue he is top 5 all time, maybe.
Yeah, if there's any form of a Mount Rushmore for movie directors, like it seems blasphemous of the idea that he wouldn't be like on that.
And
Mount
it is the
Rushmore.
range to me that puts him there. It's not just that he has so many great movies, it's that he has so many great movies that are by totally different filmmakers.
It is the thing that I find so interesting in covering all of this that I've talked about is like Scorsese is the guy who can make Cape Fear and Kundun, which are the two films that I've recorded podcast on today. Like there is like a sense of just like, I think there's a very misconception of who Scorsese is as a director, which is he's a crime director. Like he focuses on crime stories, gangster movies.
It's so not true. That is 100% not his. I mean, yes, that is where I know many people have had their biggest exposure to him. But what marks his work, film to film to film, is the way he can drop you into an environment and then just by focusing on details of that environment and how people look at their environment, he can make you feel like it's virtual reality, like you are there and you are experiencing something. Whether it's Age of Innocence or Goodfellas or Kundun, they are all shot by clearly the same person who is thinking about how to show you the tactile reality of what it feels like to live in that world. And I think that's what he does best. That is truly his greatest skill set.
And it's kind of the brilliance, and I guess we can kind of use this as a transition point into the film Kundun, which is this movie that essentially is either, as best described, is a religious epic, right? Like it's this movie about the Dalai Lama, the search for the Dalai Lama, and him being exiled out of Tibet. And it is also a movie that explores Scorsese's faith. It is a movie it's a very, like the two like primary figures that Scorsese has explored in the sense of religious, I guess 3, it would be God, it'd be Christ, and it's the Dalai Lama, how they all kind of intersect, how they all kind of relate to Scorsese. And Kundun, like, this is a film shot by Roger Deakins. So the cinematography on this film is just absolutely breathtaking. But you're right, it's a movie that pushes you straight into this world. It doesn't give you a lot of context in the sense of like, if you don't fully understand the Buddhist religion and specifically like some of the stuff going on in Tibet with China, like there is a lot that it's like, I had to research a little bit into this film. Like, just like, I kind of took a pause when I was watching this and I'm just like, I kind of just need to get orientated a little bit because I'm a little like, just like, it's so vast and it's so like not historical context you need to know, because I do think the film is capable of not.
I do think the film offers you everything you need. It's up to you how much more than you want to sort of set that into a larger context. But I think the film is very, very good at giving you information and not overloading you. Because you're right, it is a complicated situation, understanding the history of Tibet and China and sort of the dispute about what is owned by who, all that's complicated. But I love the way by focusing on him as a child, by focusing on his experience, it allows you to not worry about if you are picking up every detail. You get the feeling of what his life felt like and what it was like to be a child who is told, you are divine, you are a reincarnation of Buddha, you are our spiritual leader, and now your life is completely different. And it does such a beautiful job of putting you in that kid's shoes. So you feel the disorientation of that. You feel the sort of the wonder of those early scenes, but you also feel the fear of them. It is a really crazy, weird process that happens to this child. And it's just dropped on him. It is not something he chases or wants or goes after. It is literally a guy shows up at his house, gives him a small test and says, I'll be back, and comes back with all these other people. And that section of the film I find magical. I find really enchanting. And it's so my history with religion is that I was raised Episcopalian, and then at a certain point just decided I didn't find that faith particularly interesting or captivating, and I needed to try to figure out what I believed in. And I spent about 1.5 years with a friend of mine going to every possible kind of church. I went to services, I tried different things out, I read on there, and the closest I came to landing on a religion was Buddhism. And for me, watching this movie, I find it amazing that this is a film by a profoundly Roman Catholic person.
Yeah.
That is not just respectful of the Tibetan faith, but that puts you in it in a way that treats it completely as real and treats these beliefs as 100% rational and normal and a cultural thing that is just accepted. There is no outsider quality to the way this film is made. It doesn't feel like it was made by somebody looking at a culture from the outside and trying to find a way into it. It's very experiential. And I think part of that is him and the way he directs, but I also think a big part of it is Melissa Matheson. I truly don't know if she gets her flowers, if she gets her proper respect in this business, but anybody who wrote The Black Stallion, E.T., and Kundun is, in my opinion, a world-class, absolutely top-notch, cannot be argued with screenwriter. And I think her real gift as a writer is she puts you in the skin of whoever the main character is, and she makes you feel what they're feeling. And her scripts, Black Stallion, the first hour of that movie, there's no dialogue, basically. Yeah. It is just a boy and a horse. E.T. shouldn't work. E.T. is one of those scripts that on paper just doesn't seem like it can possibly come together, but it's her. And I think time and time again, her work, her writing is so human and so deeply felt, so empathetic, that when filmmakers take these scripts and translate them properly, the results are really magical. And I think this film belongs right next to The Black Stallion and E.T. in terms of the way it's told. There is a voice that to me seems very consistent between those three things that puts you in someone else's skin.
The kind of brilliance of Kundun when you're talking about it is like it does fundamentally what E.T. understands, which is it is a movie, it is a coming of age story. And that is what Scorsese can root this movie in, because, you know, you're right. Like, he is a Roman Catholic, like true and true. And so there was like almost even like going into this movie, not knowing exactly what this movie was. I was a little worried about kind of the westernization of this. Like, is this story going to feel in any way disrespectful? Is this going to be kind of like just kind of plainly, is this going to be like a white guy trying to explain Eastern religion? Like, is that like.
And I would guarantee, and I would argue that almost any other filmmakers besides Matheson and Scorsese would have put a white character into the movie to give us the angle in. And that would have been the whole movie. It would have been the white guy's perspective so that we understood. No.
Yeah,
I can identify with this.
Yeah, we've seen movies where they basically, it would almost be like a journalist type character who's going in to investigate kind of this whole thing going on and like kind of document it all. What's so brilliant about when we get into this movie that I was kind of just so like taken away with was, one, is the scale of this movie, and two, just for full context to all listeners, Drew and I were supposed to record this a few weeks ago, and I'm actually really glad we delayed it because at that point, I hadn't rewatched The Last Temptation of Christ, which I now have. So I now have this like context of, I've seen The Last Temptation of Christ, I've seen Kundun, and I've seen Silence being one of my favorites. And, you know, Kundun is now the last episode of those three that I'm recording. And the thing that I find so fascinating, and this isn't to get too much into The Last Temptation, but The Last Temptation is essentially like, the reason all those characters are white to some degree is, one, obviously just kind of what Hollywood is. It also kind of allows Scorsese to kind of put himself into the world way more, make it way more personal. I mean, it's essentially like all the characters are talking with New York accents. This movie could be set in New York. It makes it really, really feel like Scorsese is, one, because he's also quite literally in the film, but in this context, like, he brings himself into it. With Kundun, what's so brilliant about that juxtaposed is the idea that you see these two, and now one of them exists obviously as a far more personal one, in the sense of Last Temptation is him kind of exploring his own faith, his own belief. And the second one is him just exploring what it kind of means to be a religious symbol, a religious, you know, the face of a movement, and what that
you
means.
You were told as a child, you are the reincarnated Buddha. This is not symbolism. This is a real thing that is a firmly held belief that you are the reincarnated soul of the last Dalai Lama, that you are back, that this is a continuous thing, that we are part. that is a big thing to drop on a child. And I think one of the dangers of doing that is you end up with despots. You end up with people who believe so firmly in their own divine being and their own divine right that they will do anything. This is the opposite. This is by raising him with the responsibility of being the Lama. It is fascinating to watch each stage of his development, because he's still a child when they tell him this, and he's very much a child. He still plays. He still has that instinct for games. He's still so young. He's such a baby at the beginning of this movie. And
so cute too, like such a cute actor.
It's so, the first two are both adorable, and I love the sullen face second version of him, who's just a little bit of got a little bit of a fist face, and he's a little bit more. There is something so great about that kid, and I really find him utterly charming. But they are children, and that's the thing, is they are given space to be children. You see how carefully the rest of them protect that childlike quality in him. They don't want him to be too grown up too fast. They don't want him to rush into adulthood. They need him to have some childlike wonder. And it is fascinating to watch them deal with this religious figure who is also very much a human child. And I find that both that and Last Temptation, they wrestle with those notions of the divine and the human occupying the same body. Yeah. And if you take this literally, if you take Jesus literally, he is God's incarnate body, as the film does. It is the only film I have ever seen, and I think I've seen pretty much every Jesus movie there is. It's the only one that doesn't treat it as he walks into a room and there's a light bulb behind him and he's perfect and he's always. Last Temptation, he is imperfect as he was supposed to be. The whole point is divine made flesh, divine made human. And Last Temptation explores the human side of that and what that means. I was working at a theater when that was getting ready to come out. And for about a year before it came out, the press was so on that film's jock from day one that as soon as it was announced, we started getting bomb threats. If you play this movie, we will blow your theater. We will kill you. You will die. And my manager's response to it was, I was the guy that they would hand the phone to. If it was a call about Last Temptation of Christ, they would just hand me the phone. And my manager's policy was, whatever.
Sure.
Go for it. And I would not have it. I for a year, we fielded insane phone calls and upset from people who didn't know a thing about the movie. Who only knew that they were being told it was going to be bad for Jesus. And for a year, we heard that. And then the movie came out. And again, people had the reaction. I don't know how you can watch that movie and think that that movie is anything but deeply devout and deeply, deeply serious about the notion of Christ is real. So Kundun does the same thing. Kundun treats the idea that you are the reincarnated Buddha with respect and with weight. It is real. It is not in any point in this movie does he pull the curtain back and go, but here's what's really going on, or here's what's really. He 100% treats this faith as serious and real. And I think that is an act of empathy from a filmmaker that we don't often see. We don't often see people who are so willing to not just explore another culture, but to explore it from such a place of centered empathy. And I think that is one of his great gifts. It is what unites a movie like Kundun and a movie like Age of Innocence and a movie like Goodfellas is they are all cultural x-rays where he lays bare how a culture works, how everybody relates, how things operate within that culture. That's what he does better than anybody else. And you talk about Wolf of Wall Street. You don't need to know a single thing about finance to watch Wolf of Wall Street and get it all. He gives you all the information you need. He does the same thing here. He does the same thing in Goodfellas. He is so good at boiling down an entire complicated world and showing you how all of it works and then making you understand the stakes in that world. It's remarkable. I truly don't think there's anybody else that we've ever had that has had the breadth of interests he has and that has executed them so well every single time.
I think the thing that when we talk about Scorsese, that's so easy to get lost in, it's a point that I was talking about with a few friends of mine recently, is there was this aspect of it where I think just because of the worlds that he's created, specifically in the crime genre. Like, there's an idea that Scorsese is himself a very cynical filmmaker. That's the complete opposite. This man is an extremely sincere filmmaker, and that's what comes through with Kundun. Is this is a movie where you're right, everything is taken as sincere. It is never a question of this man's faith in the sense that, like, oh, maybe Buddhism is lies. Like, that's not the angle that he chooses to approach this movie, and smartly. It's very smart that he doesn't choose to do that. And in it, it's just, it again allows this movie to, you're right, what Scorsese does so well with Christ in Last Temptation, and with Kundun here, and then also what he does so well with the character of Andrew Garfield in Silence, is he gives these characters space to feel real. And in that space, like, you're right, like when we get to see them play with each other, like when we get to see them like just kind of interact as a kid, we get the actual, like, this is a human being going through struggles and faith. And what Scorsese's so interested in is, how can everybody have this going on in the world, see some of the most inhumane stuff, and yet at the same time still feel strong in their faith. And Christ, obviously, in Last Temptation, that's probably the most of the struggles, and certainly the character of Silence. This in the Dalai Lama is this character who's just, he has to, like, he almost doesn't know anything else but this level of persecution from like childhood on. And it just, when we get to the elements of China and Tibet in this movie, the complexity rises, and yet we still get to just empathize with this, who it is. It's a child. Like, we're still watching a child feel this pressure, feel this weight, and just feel connected with them, because again, it's a coming of age story. It's the simplest trick of this movie is written like E.T. It is coming of age.
Yeah. I love there is a scene in this movie that I find so riveting, and it's when he encounters Mao Zedong finally.
Mm-hmm.
And the face to face between them. I think Robert Lin as Mao Zedong is phenomenal. That is one of those one scene steal a movie performances. He's so good. And it's the moment when, there's this kind of casual nature to the encounter. It's a casual conversation. It is not, it is very amiable. It doesn't feel like a confrontation at first, but the way he casually says, by the way, you do understand, religion is poison.
Mm-hmm.
It is absolute poison. And it is the opiate of the masses, and it is no good. You know that, right? Yeah. It is such a chilling moment to realize that he is being tested, and he is being told, you have a figurehead position, but I don't believe in any of it. I know it's bad for everybody, and sooner or later, I'm going to have to make a decision about you. It is one of the most threatening, ominous moments, and it's not presented as that, but it is. There's something really wonderful and potent about it, and it drops you into a historical context in a way that becomes very immediate. You don't have to have pages and pages and pages of text to tell you what's going on there. As a viewer, you get it.
It's such a clear threat, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's one of those, like, I saw Kundun the same weekend that I saw Oppenheimer. And Oppenheimer has like a really similar moment with two character actors, one of them being Casey Affleck, which I think is the most disturbing scene in the movie. And the other one is with the general when they're discussing the bombing of where they're going to bomb. And you have a general, you've seen the movie, I hope.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. I wanted to make sure I wasn't spoiling.
Yeah,
The scariest scene in Oppenheimer is essentially, and I'm spoiling the movie. There's a scene where they're all sitting down deciding what's going to get blown up, like what city. And the general's like, oh, let's not blow this city up. Like, let's take it off. It has a lot of cultural significance and also a honeymoon there.
Yeah, which is real. That actually happened. That's a real moment. And that's why Kyoto wasn't bombed. That is insanity.
It's an insanity. It was one of those things. I read that the actor who played him actually, and this is the reason, like, I'm in full support of the strikes going on with SAG and WGA, is because an actor can do this. Like, they read up on this character and found that nugget of history, because that's not in the script. And they brought that. And it's just like incredible. But with Kundun does it, and with this scene that you're specifically talking about, it does fully give the context of this world, and it also puts the stakes. Like, it is eventually like your time will come, and eventually I'm just going to have to crush you. So
Yeah.
either get on board and kind of come with
You can be
me.
useful to me.
Yeah, I will allow you because I understand you have a symbolic representation.
Exactly.
To
You
Tibet.
are valuable as a symbol.
Yeah, like it's kind of the thing, like, come join me, like, you'll be my friend, like, I will take care of you. If you don't, like, that's your choice. Like, he does kind of present it as a choice. Do realize I will destroy you. And it's never phrased it that way, but it is such a thinly veiled threat. And it's kind of the first time in the movie, not to say that the Dalai Lama in this movie hasn't experienced complexities or threats or anything else. This is the first time where he really, it's the him kind of being awakened to just like the stakes of this, just like,
Yeah.
oh, this guy will kill me. Like,
Oh,
he
yeah.
has no like care in the world. Like, he will kill me, and it will all be over if I kind of don't follow him. And that's the stakes of essentially then the third act of this movie is just like, you have this guy who will do anything to ensure power in Tibet.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's frightening.
Yeah.
And
It's what's interesting about this movie is I for a movie that is as deliberate as it is, Kundun does not move quickly. Kundun is a movie that it takes its time. It doles out information slowly. It wants you to kind of soak in the world. It is amazing how tense I get by a certain point in the film. And it's not like he is intentionally playing it like a suspense film, but that last act of the movie, even if you know your history, even if you know he makes it out and he's okay, and then he's still walking around and still part of, you really do start to feel the world shrinking around him. And you start to realize just how insane the situation was that he was in. That, again, not something he ever asked for, not something he chose. This was a role that was chosen for him as a child. And then to have the responsibility of the future of your entire country and the existence of your country kind of hinging on your behavior and your choices. It goes from being a spiritual weight that he carries for his nation to a literal weight that he carries for the future of if his nation even exists. And it is a profound amount of responsibility to dump on anybody. As a central character, I find him just heartbreaking and compelling. And it absolutely affected the way I looked at the Dalai Lama after this. I knew his story in broad strokes.
Sure.
After you see this movie, it is very hard not to see him in a very different light as a human being. And I think that is, obviously, that was the point of them making it. That was why Melissa Matheson, who is a practicing Buddhist and who had become friendly with him, that was the whole thing. When she met him and got this chance to say to him, I would like to tell your story, she really took that as a responsibility. And I think what they did is beautiful. I also think that they had to know going in that there was going to be a response from China. The reason this movie, the reason I'm not surprised that you really were unaware of this movie is it is still a political football. It is still something that causes genuine consternation to China. They hate that this movie exists at all.
You don't know how hard this was for me to track down on Blu-ray. Like, this was not like a simple, like, I can go pick it up anywhere or I can order it on Amazon. Like, I did end up ordering it on Amazon, but I had to find like the right regional cut of it, like all this stuff. Like, it was not an easy movie for me to get my hands on. It's not streaming anywhere. There's just, it's a lack of information. That was one that I was reading about, like Disney's involvement in all of this, what's going on. Like, basically,
it absolutely impacts the idea of whether or not they can release their movies in China. And this movie has been disappeared.
Yeah.
I guarantee there's never going to be a 4K release of this. There's never going to be another. I think we're done with it in physical media. And it's a major work by a major filmmaker from a giant studio. And it has essentially been disappeared for political reasons.
It's such like, because it's weirdly how much it echoes the actual movie of what's going on is Scorsese's then relationship with what's going on with Disney at that time in China, and then still going on today. Like, there is so much in it that is reflective of what the Dalai Lama is facing, not again to the same stakes, but certainly of the what is going on in it. Like, you know, I actually asked this question a few weeks ago when After Hours came out, I went on the Reddit for Criterion, and I just asked the simple question: now that After Hours is out on 4K, what movie would you like of Scorsese's to be the title release? And Kundun was the number one answer by far. And I think it's just simply because for a lot of people like us who collect that stuff, it's not an easy one to come by. And
honestly, like, Criterion's the only hope. And
that is,
I think if they did it, Disney could get away with saying, well, we didn't do it. We didn't put it back out, and we don't own Criterion, and we're really upset about it. It's a real bummer. Sorry about that, China. But that could be the scenario under which it happened. And truly, like the idea that I have a 4K copy of After Hours is mind-boggling to me, considering what a disaster that was financially.
Yeah.
So truly, things come around. I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility. The fact that Last Temptation is part of the Criterion collection makes me think that it could be on their radar. Like, they have done so many of his films.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where it's just like, it's Scorsese, so it just feels like Criterion like knows that it knows the exact second that it releases any Criterion collection of Scorsese, there is going to be an audience for it. What I just, when watching this film for the first time a few weeks ago, there is a scale to this movie that I was impressed by, and like, this is a Roger Deakins cinematography.
Oh
like,
my
this is
God,
like
it's so beautiful,
incredibly like, and it's Roger Deakins is a character within the film, even though he's never present, like just the way, and it perfectly like realizes what you were talking about of like, we get this grand world of Tibet. And as the movie goes along, Deakins like cinematography actually like shrinks in with the film. Like, it becomes a lot more personal by the end, where it's just like a lot of the third act of this movie is guys having conversation in rooms, like closed doors behind, kind of just talking about what the future of Tibet and Buddhism is going to look like and what the Dalai Lama is going to do. And that's where the central struggle of this movie is. Like, what do you do? Because I think there's certainly an element of this film where the Dalai Lama is watching and he's like, maybe the best option for me is to kind of be a puppet to this guy and kind of allow it and just kind of make sure my people are safe. So kind of appeasing. And then there's a certain point where he realizes appeasement means standing down and being complicit.
Yeah.
And that's essentially when the turning point happens, where he's like, I am either going to be complicit to these crimes or I'm going to stand up against these crimes.
That dream that he has, where it's just him laying in the courtyard and we gradually pull back and there's thousands of dead Tibetans around him.
Oh my God.
Is one of the most chilling images of Scorsese's career, and a beautiful tableau, like a horrifying, beautiful tableau. I think the combination of Deakins and Philip Glass. I was a big Cowardice fan as a kid, and it was one of those movies where I saw it by accident. Like, it was on PBS and it said presented by Francis Ford Coppola, and I was like, well, I'll watch that. Yeah, it's presented by Francis Ford Coppola, sure. And then I watched Cowardice, which I assume you're familiar with.
I've heard of it, never watched.
So Cowardice is a nonlinear documentary made by a monk named Godfrey Reggio. And it started as experimental film, sort of a collection of images that he had put together. And it literally translates in Hopi Indian as world out of balance. And the documentary simply shows the way the natural world and the inorganic, artificial world made by man exist side by side and encroach upon one another. And the way we are winning, unfortunately. And the film is footage that he had collected, stock footage, new footage that he had shot over time. But it is a profound experience. It's one of those movies that everybody's going to have their own interpretation they take from it. It is very much an experimental film. It is not in any way a traditional narrative. But it for me was a transformative. I realized films can be anything. Oh my God, films can be whatever. And part of that was the Philip Glass score. Philip Glass's score for that is like this operatic assault that happens to you the entire time. His score here, I find to be even better. I think it is a better score. I think it is a remarkable piece of taking actual Tibetan instrumentation and sort of the sound of what we think of as Tibetan music, but also orchestrating it in a way that is very Western, it is a wild piece of composition, and as important to the character of the film as Deacon's work. I think it is the two of them together that kind of set this aesthetic mood that is hypnotic. You really get lost in this film at a certain point. I find it as an experience, it is one of his purest cinema experiences, because there's big chunks of this movie where there's no talking, there's no narrative in the traditional sense. It is just experience. You just kind of sit and soak in how these people live and what their world looks like. And that's rare for him, but it's really wonderful.
It's also like, it's all these elements, like, and it's also the thing, like, Scorsese is such a good picker of the people that he continues to work with. And the name that I actually haven't brought up enough in this series is Thelma Schoonmaker. I can never pronounce her
Thelma
name.
Schoonmaker.
Her editing,
she's the best,
is like, I mean, world-class, top-notch best. And it's so funny because, you know, I just did the Casino pod a few days ago. I just recorded that. Like, the fact that Casino and Kundun are back to back is like the absolute wildest ride, where it's just like, because Casino is all style and editing. The only comparison I would have to it is maybe JFK, like, level of, like, there's just so much going on with the narration over it. And then here it's so reserved. Like, the editing is a part of the movie, but again, she's able to just kind of pull back, allow the movie to flow at the pace it needs to, because I think there would be a fear of, and I think it is kind of rooted in this movie, is this is both deeply cinematic in the way that Roger Deakins and that Philip Glass, you know, composed this movie, and the way Scorsese has an eye for this movie, and the way this story chooses to tell itself is a little uncinematic, in the sense that it's like, you're right, it is a little slower. I watched this movie with my mom, and I'm not saying my mom checked out of this movie, but there was a certain slowness to it that by the end, she's like, I like the movie. It's a little slow at times. Like, it's a little just too slow for my taste. Like, there is a level of just like, it takes its time to get into it. And it's also kind of the genius of Thelma in this, where it's just like, it would have been easy to cut out scenes from this movie, and yet the choice not to cut them out, like what stays in the film, allows the world of Tibet to be a world, essentially. Like, we are transported into the world of Tibet, because otherwise it could have just been a straightforward, we're going to focus with the Dalai Lama, we'll tell his story, but we don't get the scale of Tibet. We get the scale of Tibet here wonderfully.
Well, also, and when you talk about her as an editor, and how unbelievably talented she is, she's truly one of the best we've ever seen. And look at the rhythms of, in Goodfellas, the whole sequence as the FBI is closing in and Ray is melting down and they're circling his house and he's making pasta and he's running errands, and look at the cocaine rhythm of that feels like you're on drugs and your day is getting it jangles. It gets more and more intense as it goes, and there's this, and she knows how to do that. Then look at the sequence towards the end of this film as they're trying to get out of Tibet and they're trying to get to India. It's cut totally different. There's nothing, there's none of the same rhythms. There's none of the same. And yet the emotional urgency is communicated in a different way. And the final scenes where he shows up at the Indian border and he delivers that last line, which I think is so devastating and so beautiful, when they ask you, are you the Lord Buddha? And he says, I think that I am a reflection, like the moon on water. When you see me and I try to be a good man, you see yourself.
See yourself, yeah.
And then the rest of the movie is silent. The final stretch of the movie is simply him getting to his new home, him unpacking the telescope, setting it up, putting it on the stand, and then looking at Tibet.
Yeah.
And you realize he can't go back. And
then
those final images, I think, are devastating. And it's so quiet and it's so simple. And it's a series, I think it's like 6 shots.
Yeah.
But the elegance of the way those 6 shots are put together, the precision, that's Schoonmaker. It's we get overwhelmed by editing in something like JFK or in Oppenheimer, but it is the simplicity of those choices at the end and how quiet and straightforward and no nonsense it is, and it communicates one simple idea: I want to go there and I never will again.
Yeah.
Man, I find it devastating. And I think it's all of them. It is how Scorsese shot it. It is how Deakins composes it. It's how she cuts it. It's all of it together. He has gotten to a point with his collaborators where their work together is so effortless and beautiful. And he is able to communicate so clearly what he needs to each of these artists that they raise their game when they work with him. I see things out of artists when they work with Scorsese that they don't do anywhere else. And I think it's what he wants, but it's also they know that they're working with somebody who they want to give their very best to. And so I do think everybody brings their A game with him, actors, craftsmen, whoever it is. And I think everybody rises to that level that he sets. And the result is something like this, where this film gets under my skin. It really haunts me each time I return to it. And I am once again reminded that it's not about whether he's right or wrong or anything. It simply allows you to feel his feelings about Tibet. How does he feel about never going home? And why is that urgent? And that's the best form of communication. I don't need to be told everything, but being able to feel it from his point of view, now I can't shake it.
There's this element of this movie because I think everything that you said is correct. And there's also this other element when I'm watching this film where I'm just like, one of the powerful things that we sometimes rarely talk about filmmakers is life experience for them. And like, he's a father at this point. Like, there is a deeply like personal sense that he has in this movie where he's watching this, unfold to a 12-year-old and kind of the weight and responsibility. And there's kind of like almost like a proudness to it that Scorsese feels like it's just like the fact that this person could do this and accomplish this and have this and be so composed. Like, there is a reverence to him and a love to him that I think that's the father aspect of him. Not to again say that like if Scorsese was never a father, like he wouldn't be able to make this movie, but there is just this other level of filmmaking where it's an empatheticness that comes from, having the life experience of being a father and knowing that feeling. And like, the father-son relationship in this movie, and specifically the parents' relationship in this movie, is fundamental to understanding this first act of the movie.
So odd. And it's so odd. What a strange relationship to have with your child, where your child is now the spiritual center of your nation and is still your child. Very much a 5-year-old or 6-year-old child. Those early sequences where he like demands to sit at the head of the table and he's kind of a bossy little thing, they're very funny, but they're also it grounds you very quickly in the reality of him as a child, so that when you do see him later as the Dalai Lama and he has gained this wisdom and he has gained this life experience, you still see the kid in him. Yeah. And we as an audience now can't help but think of that little child that he once was. And that's something that you really don't. How often do we think of the Pope as a kid? How often do we think of major world players as children or as what they started as? And I think that's kind of the brilliance of this movie, is for someone who is still alive and is still a major world figure. This is one of the most intimate biopics I've seen of somebody living, of somebody still kind of active and living. And it does feel like on his part, what an act of faith to invite them in. You're the Dalai Lama, man. You don't know what Hollywood's going to do with you. You don't know for sure how they're going to treat you. There is a huge sort of act of faith that this involves, saying, okay, you can tell my story. And I know you're Catholic and I know you're Italian and I know you have a totally different background than I do, but I think you'll get it right. Man, talk about a real sort of generous thing to do, both from his point of view and also then from Scorsese's, to make sure that you take the time to do this right and to treat this human being with full complexity. It would have been so easy to also just turn this into a hagiography, just like sort of a he's perfect. This is, sort of an advertisement for the Dalai Lama. It's not that either. And I think that's what China gets upset about, is that they feel like it is. But it's not. It is very much a portrait of a human being. I find him complicated. I don't find him perfect, but I find him human, and that is the thing that draws me to him.
Mm-hmm. I think it's like such a good, this is so largely due to the multiple actors that we get to play the Dalai Lama, where you get the sense of them growing up. One of the aspects, and I couldn't confirm if this was real in my research, I heard that Paul Schrader was at one point tapped to write this screenplay. And it's this wild belief, or at least be associated with Kundun in some fashion. And it's this is the lucky thing of history. kind of correcting itself, where it's just like, I love Paul Schrader. I worship. I have a Facebook account just to solely read what Paul Schrader is thinking, which 75% of the time it's just like, all right, go off, King. But like,
yeah, cranky old man. All right, here we go.
But like the aspect of Kundun does not fit with Schrader. Like, nope. And it's like
totally different writer.
It's the, again, brilliance of Scorsese being like, I'll bring you back for bringing out the death. Like you'll be here in a second. Like we'll make our thing together. But it is like with Kundun, there is this specialness to it where it's reserved. It's, you know, this is a filmmaker in Scorsese who is both maximalist and minimalist. He can do both so easily. And it's the only way you can make a film like this is being a film historian yourself, knowing how the other greats have made and approached movies like this. It is just like you see the student of film coming out. And like, this is a guy who's not afraid to be like, yeah, I pulled shots directly from this film that I loved, that I watched as a kid. And it's just there is such a, when watching Kundun, and I talked about this before we kind of went on air, was like, I didn't know what direction I was going to talk about this movie in any sense. Like, I just didn't know the angle. And the angle that I've kind of realized in talking with you is just the world of this. Like, there is such a world being explored, and it's the difficulty of having the weight of that on your shoulders, which is so brilliantly explored. And it's that same line that you said at the very end, the final line of the movie, that is an acknowledgement of like what this story is something astonishing, and it's so heartbreaking. Like, it is a heartbreaking realization that like he has this weight on his shoulder and he will never be able to go home to a place that he calls home. And it's like, you know, I watched the John Oliver interview with the Dalai Lama post watching this movie, just to kind of like refresh on what was going on. Because again, I'm not particularly well versed in what's going on with Tibet-Chinese relationship at this moment. But again, I think the part that like astonished me, and it was also something you get from Kundun, the Dalai Lama never lost his sense of humor and like hope and belief in the world. And I think that's what Scorsese is just so impressed with, like the fact that like this person, again, can live this entire life and yet still live a life that's complete, that's full, and is full of hope and optimism, despite the fact that of all people, he should be the most cynical. Like, he's seen humanity at its worst. And it's a brilliant thing that we haven't really talked about. One of the really devastating moments for me in this movie is the seeing of the atomic bombs, when they see that on it's fairly early on in the movie, but just like, again, that's kind of somebody's first exposure to this world is, you know, decaying to some degree. Like, this world will probably inevitably end up destroying myself. And what does that mean to be the figure of hope and inspiration? Like, it's all tied in together. It's such a mesmerizingly beautiful, like it kind of feels like poetry at times in this movie, where it's just so soft and gentle, and it's juxtaposed to this great violence and this great like heartbreak. But again, it's never violent in this movie, but it's so present in there.
I think the key image for me in the whole film is the sand mandalas at the beginning, because to me that is what this movie is. It is a portrait painted in sand. It is temporary and fleeting. I find that art so fascinating. The idea that you make these beautiful, detailed, incredible sand paintings, and they're designed to be then wiped away.
Yeah.
That it is meant to be art, to be seen once and remembered and then gone. And I feel like our lives are like that. Our lives are very temporary. They're very fleeting. I think the Dalai Lama is a very brief presence. He's been on Earth for a long time now, but in the grand scheme of things, a moment, a brief moment, and then he will be gone to like sand. And I think that one image at the beginning of the film, to me, has always hung over the whole movie, and always feels to me like sort of the defining thing that is underlined, or is kind of underlining everything that we're watching, this temporary nature of who and what we are, and that things pass. And this moment in China, is a very long moment so far, but eventually something will turn. Tibet will not always be what Tibet is now. China will not always be what China is now. And I think the film is optimistic in as much as it can be. Even the title card at the very end, he still hopes to return home one day.
Yeah.
I find moving and heartbreaking and yet hopeful. There is still some hope that something can be negotiated, that something will change or break, or that our world will some way reshape itself just enough to give him back his home. And I think there is something really beautiful in there.
And I think it also like because ties into the idea of who the Dalai Lama is. It might not, it like to some degree, I even read that end as like, maybe it's not in his lifetime, but the Dalai Lama will hopefully return to Tibet and its people. Like there is just something like kind of time heals all wounds, not necessarily like that's the idea of this movie, but like there is a certain like, there is a hopefulness to it. And it's such the ending devastated me kind of the same way like all three of Scorsese's like religious epics have devastated me. Silence to me, and I'll just kind of say it because I had Clayton Davis from Variety on for the Silence episode, and that's like his favorite Scorsese movie just because.
Wow.
And for me, that's like another movie that's one of my favorite of Scorsese because as someone who grew up in a similar experience as Scorsese, has similar fate, like there's a certain attachment to I have with Silence. And like what's so powerful about all three of those movies is it is three people who don't understand everything, and yet they understand one aspect of their life, which is the belief in something. And that belief, you know, for Christ is that he is God.
And that he must die.
Yeah. In Kundun, it is that he is the Dalai Lama. He will return to Tibet hopefully one day. That's the hope, that's the optimism, that's probably the belief that's really like his, you know, his star that he's guys on. And then in Silence, it's the belief of despite the life that I've lived, despite everything that I've lied, I still love God and that God will accept me into his kingdom. And that's like the final cross. Like that is three like devastating endings for me. And like Silence is my favorite of these three, but like Kundun is like, I think Silence does so well. It takes what Last Temptation is and it takes what Kundun is, and it brings them kind of all together in one figure into the Andrew Garfield character. But yeah, this was such I think the last thing that I really want to talk about with Kundun is specifically just the brevity, or I might be using that word wrong, probably not brevity, but it's the vastness of Scorsese's genre, like the ability to be able to tap into any of this at his like wheelhouse. Like it's just like one of those things where it's just like not a lot of directors, not a lot of human beings, not a lot of artists can accomplish Cape Fear, Casino, Kundun, like bringing out the dead back to back to back to back. I
always like to throw Age of Innocence in there because Age of Innocence is one of the ones that so many people have done that time period in that sort of world. And, obviously Merchant Ivory essentially owned that time period and that kind of movie, that sort of costume drama. Age of Innocence knocks me out. And it's, again, it's the focus on detail. It is the way he lets you know how every social gesture in Age of Innocence, what it means, what weight it carries. I think he is an anthropologist. I think that is the best way we can describe Scorsese. His best movies are anthropological studies of a culture that allows you to look at how the culture behaves. Think of the way he teaches you in Goodfellas about the way they blow businesses out, or the way being a made man works, or think about in Casino, the way he teaches you the way casinos guard their profits, or the way they take care of cheaters, or in Age of Innocence, it's all about who's allowed to touch what's allowed to be seen, what's allowed to be shown. He is so exceptional at Gangs of New York is another one where I feel like he gets excited about going into a place and a time and then making sure you feel 100% grounded in it. Like it's a real place in a real time, and you come out the other side of it feeling like you've experienced it, not like you watched it, but like you soaked in it. And I think that is one of the big qualities in his movies that you can't really imitate. You can't do that as well as he can. He just has this ability to time travel into different cultures and drop you into the middle of them as if they are real.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's an incredible, like, it's movie magic, and it's like kind of best, like, Inception is just like a guy who can just bring you into a world and just bring you into a world for 2 hours. Like, and that's like, I think it's my favorite thing about Scorsese is just like, he's willing to do that. These are the stories that he's interested in, and he doesn't really care financially about it. Like,
No.
it's my favorite thing about him. Like, so many directors are so concerned, especially with 21st century studios kind of operating the way they do, the superhero craze. Like, there's so much that's so much down to the bottom line profit, and Scorsese is so deeply not interested in that. Like, he could make very cinematic, really incredible pieces of art that are huge financial successes. Like, he could make big crowd pleasers, and that's just not what he's like.
Yeah, if they gave him, there's almost no script you could give him that he would knock out of the park.
Yeah,
and if anything, he would elevate those things.
Yeah, exactly.
His heart isn't in it. Yeah,
he could do any of it. Like, it is really the talent of someone who could make any type of film, but like just chooses the types of projects that he wants and that he's most connected to. And that's another aspect of it. Like, kind of my last point on this movie is like it's this script with Silence, with Last Temptation of Christ as well. Like, this is somebody who deeply understands their own personal struggles and personal faith and what that means to them, because they tap into that. And that, like, as much as the Dalai Lama is its own story and there's so much that he's interested in, he is able to connect into Kundun and think like, I understand having this question of how my faith can exist in a world like that, or the evilness of.
Right. And what do you do?
Like,
what's
aspects.
right? Do I stay and fight for Tibet? Do I leave and survive? Like, what is the right thing to do? What is the moral message that I send when I do these things?
Exactly.
Like, he really wrestles with all of that and makes you feel the weight of it.
Yeah. I just think it's an incredible trick. It's an incredible direction. Just everything that he does. I mean, it's why we talk about him as the greats. Like, Martin Scorsese is the great, and Kundun, even if it's not like probably in my personal top 5, like, that's the thing that I've found so exciting in this series. Even the films that I kind of have bottom tier for me right now, like something like Who's That Knocking at My Door, which I'm still like, that's still kind of a 3-star movie for me.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just like, there's nothing that I won't watch from him.
Yeah.
Like,
I'm
it's
with
his
you.
best gift.
I think his documentary work is terrific.
Incredible.
I think there's very few films of his. I think maybe my least favorite of his big movies is New York, New York.
Sure.
And even with New York, New York, I am fascinated by the style exercise, by what he's doing, by the idea that he's trying to make a 1940s musical technically, but he's trying to give it the 1970s character sort of sensibilities. I admire that as a swing. I think it's one of the few times in his career he didn't quite connect. Like, he didn't put together all the things he was trying to get to put together, but the ambition is still insane. And there are very few films above that I don't like. I think he has pretty much had just banger after banger. And it is the fact that he has explored so many different perspectives, and the fact that he is not the easily pigeonholed one note filmmaker that so many people, like, you said at the beginning that you take your pronunciation of Kundun from The Sopranos, where they use it as a punchline. Yo, Marty, I even love Kundun. Like, it's a joke. Ha ha. I even love your worst movie. It's not his worst movie. And I think that, as a Scorsese fan, I find the things that are the least stereotypically Scorsese to be the moments that are most exciting in his career.
I agree.
Truly, I think he can do anything, and he has proven it over and over and over.
Yeah, I mean, like, it is just like, there's no one else in my life for films that I like have this level of just like respect and admiration for. Like, just watching them, I'm just like, because even the stuff that doesn't fully click, I'm like so interested in it and how it doesn't click for me. Like, that's the best thing. And like, there's a lot of directors that come out of that 1970s era that are still like working, like, and that I'll still watch. Like Spielberg, like I still think Spielberg has like
Spielberg
like,
still got his fastball. He's still Spielberg.
He still made The Fabelmans, which ended up
Yep.
still being one of my favorite films of last year. Like,
Yep.
Like he still has it. There's other guys like who haven't had it. Woody Allen's very much lost his fastball, which, but like there is just a talent to him, and I guess that's kind of where I want to wrap up with Kundun. Unless, do you have any final thoughts on Kundun before we jump over to the last segment of the show?
No, I will simply say I think it is a film that should be studied for craft, if nothing else. Even if you don't connect to the idea of the Dalai Lama or the story of the Dalai Lama, I think the deacon's work in this movie is so unbelievably next level great, and I think is a visual experience that people owe themselves. It is a lush movie, and the combination of deacons and glass. Yeah. You could almost take the dialogue track out of this film and just soak in it, and it's still a major accomplishment. And
you'd probably still get the story. Like it's so central in the music, in the editing, like all of it, like playing together, the cinematography. I totally agree with you. It's also just like with Deacon's kind of final point for me. It's just like this is a cinematographer who, like, you know, we know what his Coen brothers movies like look like. Not to say we know, but I mean, like, there's a certain style that he brings. Like we know what that relationship works with. I do love when we get to see Deakins kind of like under somebody else's. And this is the only time that he's worked with Scorsese. And it is just kind of a momentous like occasion with it. Like it is something so powerfully moving. And it's one of those kind of special one and done. I do love when a director, collaborator work together. They're like, this is the project we have together. This means so much to both of us. Let's do it. And then that's kind of our career together. Like, you know, we'll do our own thing. Like it is like a profoundly special thing when it's just like getting like the act, like it's Gene Hackman and Wes Anderson, which obviously Gene Hackman had a less fun experience making Royal Tenenbaums.
But left behind something that literally,
I think it's his best work.
Defines who Gene Hackman is.
I think
one
it's
of the defining Gene Hackman.
Like Royal Tenenbaums is like, I think the quintessential Gene Hackman. But with that all said, let's kind of jump over to the last segment of the show. Drew, I always end this with 3 questions. 2 of them are kind of tied together. The first 2 being questions of who is an actor, actress that you would have loved to have seen work with Scorsese. So that actor, actress has passed on. It doesn't have to be within the time frame of when Scorsese worked. It can be completely whatever era. And the second question follow up to that is who is an actor, actress still alive that you would love to see work with Martin Scorsese?
As far as somebody who passed and who never got the chance, there's an actor who I have a profound love for, and I think he is enormously director dependent. I think his best work is when he is with filmmakers who challenge him and push him outside of his comfort zone. I would have killed to have seen what Robin Williams did with Martin Scorsese. I think he could have gotten something really wonderful out of him. As far as living actors who are still potentially could work with Scorsese, I would love one time to see the Mr. Melissa Matheson work with Scorsese. I would love to see what he got out of grumpy old Harrison Ford.
I just had that answer for Cape Fear. I was like, because Cape Fear,
grumpy old Harrison Ford, because I love this era. I love that he turned a corner somewhere in the last 3 or 4 years where he went, oh, I'm Spencer Tracy now. I get to just be a grumpy old shit forever. Awesome. This is exactly who I want to be. And it's as if he assumed his final form, because now all of a sudden, funny, grumpy, old, sort of doddering Harrison Ford, can't get enough of him. That's what I would love to see.
Yeah,
the right use.
It is the case of the right use, and it works so well. I'm trying to think, because I'm trying to answer this for every movie. There's another actor who's alive that I was just like, I was contemplating if it made sense, and I was just like, you know what? I think this guy has the juice. I've always wanted to see what his movie would look like, and I cannot believe that I just like, as saying it, I just like blanked on. Oh, duh! It's Stallone.
Yeah,
Sylvester Stallone. It's just like, because again, you just talked about a guy who's so script dependent and director dependent. When I thought Stallone lost it. I thought it was like the heyday was over. Like, and then
he did Creed. Yeah,
and then like Creed was just like
Yeah.
Like, I mean, just to me, that is Stallone's best performance. Like, I was
100%.
just so floored. And like, I'm sure you find this as a film fan yourself. Like, there's just times where you just go on YouTube and you're like, I'm just going to watch the Creed monologue where he's talking about having everything in a box and he could trade that box for one more day with his life, with his wife. Like, that's one of those moments that I've just probably watched on YouTube hundreds of times. I just like that monologue alone, or the scene where he's talking with Michael B. Jordan in the ring, and he's like, "Your father would be proud. Like, I'm proud of you, kid. Like, you taught me to keep fighting." Like, all that, and I'm just like, I would love to just see that final, like, Stallone just unabashed in a Scorsese epic. Like, that would be that. I think the other one, I'm trying to remember if I've answered this before, and I'm starting to worry that I have answered it, but I'll do it again. I was just rewatching. Oh, you know what? I'll go this guy because I don't think I've actually done. Actually, I'm now positive I haven't done him. So I was going to say Humphrey Bogart because it's Humphrey Bogart.
Sure.
The answer that I will stick with is the movie that I just rewatched again recently, The Great Dictator. Charlie Chaplin was just another guy that I'm just like, we never really got the chance to see Charlie Chaplin get old on film.
Yeah, or to see him work with other filmmakers. That's one of the real problems, not problems, but one of the real sad things about Chaplin's career is, as a artist who was his own writer director and really wanted to shape his own material exclusively, we didn't get to see other directors work with him. And I think that's a real missed opportunity, because if he had been the kind of person you could cast in other movies where he wasn't always Chaplin, I think he would have been fascinating. I really wish other directors had had a shot at using him in character roles.
Yeah. I'll throw out one more name for an actor who's alive because I've had him on the brain for now a few weeks. Robert Downey Jr. in a Scorsese film. That's all I want. Like, that is really all I want in life.
Well, he's turning a corner. I feel like he wants the character actor thing for the next however long. And I'm all for it. Please
give it all to me, because Oppenheimer was just the reminder of, oh yeah, this guy is like one of
our best terrific in Oppenheimer.
Just,
terrific.
Oh my God, incredible performance. Drew, before I let you go, one last question. Top 5 Scorsese. I've been saying this. I am saving it. The Irishman. I'm doing that episode with Keith Phipps. At that point, I will reveal what my top 5 are for Scorsese. But also, I'm keeping everyone in the audience on suspense. But Drew, I did want to hear your top 5.
Well, I've been watching a lot of them recently. Like just this past visit when my boys were here, we watched The Departed and Hugo and King of Comedy. First times for all of them for them. And you just, once again, you get hit by the range. For me, my top 5, and I really thought about this.
Yeah.
Number 5, I have Taxi Driver. Number 4, I have Wolf of Wall Street. Number 3, I have Goodfellas.
Yeah.
Number 2, I have Last Temptation. And for me, number 1 is Raging Bull.
Okay.
I still think Raging Bull is one of the great pieces of film poetry.
I agree.
And I saw it in a theater about a year and a half ago, maybe, at the Academy, at the new Academy Museum Theater. And it was a brand new... I'm going there
in like 2 weeks for Amadeus.
Have you seen anything in that theater yet?
No, I've never been to the Academy Theater at all. So I was like, I really need to go just to see Amadeus.
Oh my God.
I think the composer will be there for the movie. Maybe it's costume designer, actually.
I'm very picky about LA screens, and I feel like we have lost most of the great LA screens in the last 10 years. Some of the best screening rooms have closed. Some of the best theaters have closed. We've lost some truly great screens in the city, which is stupid. We're Los Angeles. If there's any city in the world that should be absolutely rotten with great movie screens, it's us. And we aren't. We really aren't anymore. I will say the Academy Museum, their theater is startlingly great.
I've heard that.
It's like a giant sphere. And when you walk in, you're actually walking with the theater screen behind you. You come in basically under the theater screen, and then you go up into the theater. Every seat is great. The sound and picture in that room is flawless. They have gone out of their way to make sure that they can project everything, every format of film, every format of video, whatever it is, they can project it in there. And it looks fantastic. We saw several of the Ghibli movies playing there. And I Castle in the Sky, I don't think it's ever looked better than it did there.
Mm.
So Raging Bull was a revelation in that theater. It was phenomenal. And I've seen it theatrically 3 or 4 times. It's never played like that. Whatever you go see there, man, you're in for a great show. It is a great auditorium.
I'm excited because I've never seen Amadeus. It's just one of my weird film blind spots. So I'm like, I was going to see it a few weeks ago. And I'm like, actually, I'm going to be in LA during that time. Like, might as well just go.
Theatrical is the way to do it.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic first viewing. I'm very jealous of you. That'll be great.
Yeah, that will be very exciting. Drew, thank you so much for joining me on this episode. Where can the people find you?
If you go to drewmcweeny.com, that'll take you to, there's a landing page there where you can find pretty much anything I do. I've got things for sale there at that site. I've got a couple of newsletters that you can read over at Substack, drewmcweeny.substack.com, or I am reviewing every film of the 1980s in chronological order, and you can find that at the last 80s newsletter.substack.com. And then, you can watch Voir on Netflix, which is the film show that I made with David Fincher. You can find my work all over the place. I'm hard to avoid at this point. So
I will say, as someone who's been reading film criticism for years, you are truly like the OG Godfather, however you want to describe it. Like, this is truly like, you are one of our greats. So I am honored to have you. And I was honored to have you for an episode like Kundun. I guess my last thing on this is, Marty, Kundun, I liked it. And thank you so much for joining me, Drew. Thank you all for watching this episode. We'll be back tomorrow for Bringing Out the Dead with guest. I don't think I've booked the guest yet, so we'll figure that one out as we cross that bridge. But we'll be back soon. Thank you all for watching. Take care and bye-bye.